So let's talk about the defining characteristics of the thriller genre. What are they? Well, thrillers are a genre of fiction. They've been around for decades and somehow still manage to captivate both readers and movie fans. The thriller genre is defined by a few key characteristics that do set it apart from other genres of fiction. Um, you're naturally focused on suspense and tension. The plot of a thriller is typically centered around a high stakes situation that keeps the reader or the viewer, in the case of movies, on the edge of their seats. The protagonist of a thriller generally is facing some sort of danger or obstacle, and the tension in the narrative builds as the protagonist tries to overcome that danger or obstacle. And again, the key is in this is high stakes. So something bad has to be about to happen. Failure is going to have consequences, and usually it's death of either the protagonist or maybe somebody very close to them. Another defining characteristic of thrillers is the use of plot twists, unexpected turns. Readers love those. Thrillers are known for their ability to keep the reader guessing. Plot twists also heighten the suspense, as well as keeping the audience engaged because they have to know what happens, right? And when done effectively, plot twists can turn a good thriller into a great thriller, which is obviously what we want. Thrillers feature fast-paced action sequences. Not always, but they are typical. So these sequences usually are used to heighten the tension and show the danger in a fun, engaging way. Anything from car chases to shootouts, and really are effective. Good thrillers feature a memorable villain. And later in this course, we do talk about antagonists and villains. But usually the villain is a person or a force that the protagonist is trying to overcome. And ideally, they are just as well developed and intriguing as the protagonists themselves. Again, a well-written villain can take that good thriller to the next level. Thrillers are also categorized by subgenres. Thriller is not just a thriller. We can break it down a lot more than that. Usually based on the nature of the danger or perhaps the obstacle that's faced by the protagonist, but can also rely on just style or even setting. So, for example, a political thriller might center around a political conspiracy or an intrigue, while a psychological thriller focuses more on the protagonist's mental state and the effects of maybe a trauma or an obsession. And finally, thrillers do often have a theme or a message that they're trying to convey. A lot of people view thrillers as kind of a vapid, superficial genre, but it really isn't. They don't necessarily and always do this as much as some other genres, like literary fiction, for example, but they can contain commentary on society or just something like a meditation or something on the nature of good and evil. A great thriller often has a theme that elevates the story and gives it a deeper meaning beyond just plot. Not to say they go out and preach to people, because who likes that, but the good ones, the best ones, I think, pose a question to the audience that they can think about after they close the back cover. So in conclusion, thriller genre is defined by focus on suspense, plot twists, action sequences, memorable villains, subgenres, themes, high stakes, pretty diverse genre. And these characteristics have helped make thrillers a popular genre for years and still growing to this day. So we touched on this earlier, but let's dig down a little deeper into the various subgenres of the thriller genre. And there are a lot of them. We'll just touch on some of the main ones. Because the thriller genre is a pretty broad category of fiction, and it does encompass a wide range of stories and styles. But all these subgenres are defined by unique characteristics and themes. One subgenre is the psychological thriller. These stories are focused on the inner workings of the human mind and often explore themes like obsession, trauma, and mental illness. The tension in these thrillers come from the psychological state of the protagonist, and the story itself centers around the attempts to overcome those struggles. Another subgenre is the political thriller. These stories are focused on politics, intrigue, and generally explore themes of corruption and power, ripped from the headlines, you might say. So they can be set in any government or political institution, from big cities to small towns, and usually involve a conspiracy and hidden agenda. Legal thriller, another subgenre. These stories are focused on the legal system, as one might guess, usually involving a trial or legal case as the essential conflict, and explore themes like justice, morality, and ethics. A big one is spy thriller. So thinking James Bond here, focused on espionage and international intrigue, secret agents, government agencies. These can be set in any time period and location, and they often involve high-tech gadgets and action-packed set pieces. Medical thriller, this is a new one that I was introduced to. I don't have the knowledge to write in it, but I do enjoy reading it. Involve themes of science and technology, exploring topics like medical research, genetic engineering, and bioterrorism. And then finally, the good old action thriller. These stories are focused on high-octane action sequences, also kind of like James Bond. So James Bond is a mix of two, often featuring a hero who is trying to save the day. These as well can be set any time period, any location, often in like car chases, shootouts, explosions. The thriller genre is a broad category, and again, defined by their own characteristics, but they all provide, in their own way, exciting and engaging reading experience. So it really does pay to look into each of these, see which one you enjoy reading the most, which one you might enjoy writing the most, and then dig into the details of that genre and analyze books in that genre just to make sure that when you're doing your own writing, that you're hitting all the high points of what a reader of that particular subgenre is going to expect from you. So we've talked about some subgenres of thrillers and what a thriller actually means. So let's analyze some of these successful ones, take a deeper look into the techniques and themes of thriller fiction. And we're going to talk about novels and movies, but we'll start with novels. And one of the first one that comes to my mind is Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris, which they also made into a very creepy movie. But in this groundbreaking psychological thriller, the author, Thomas Harris, introduces the terrifying character of Dr. Hannibal Lecter, brilliant psychiatrist turned serial killer. So I guess it's never too late to pursue your dreams. I don't know. But this novel's success largely lies in its exploration of the dark depths of the human psyche, and very dark they are, and its ability to create a chilling atmosphere through vivid descriptions and really talented, deft character development. This is a good book to study for that, because even though Lecter is terrifying and horrendous, we are also fascinated by him, right? But also it's important to look at the dynamic between the protagonist, Clarice Starling, and Lecter, because that's a key element that drives the story forward and adds to its suspenseful nature, because we care about these people, or at least by Starling and her interaction with Lecter. We cannot look away. But we'll talk about characterization in another module. Another example in books is Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. That's a contemporary thriller, really known for its intricate plot, which revolves around the disappearance of the protagonist's wife and then the investigation that comes after that. Flynn does a really good job here of employing alternating narrative perspectives, which is not an easy thing to pull off, by the way. And it allows us to experience the story through the eyes of both the husband and the missing wife. So that technique, combined here with a series of shocking plot twists, and if you've read the book, you know this, keeps the reader guessing until the very end. It really does a great job of creating a very intense reading experience. Then The Da Vinci Code, Dan Brown, really well known, obviously, also made into a movie, a blend of historical fiction and conspiracy. This book uses fast-paced narrative and themes that I guess some people may consider controversial, but Brown has a really good ability to weave complex codes and historical facts into a story, which kind of gives this thriller an intellectual feel or dimension. And of course, the whole classic race against time to uncover hidden truths, and that ups the level of suspense a lot. Anytime you have that ticking clock in there, great way to keep the reader engaged. But of course, it's not just books. Also, the other thrillers. We also can talk about thriller films, which I love to watch. A classic one is Psycho by Hitchcock, really considered one of the most influential films in the genre, maybe of all time. Hitchcock's use of camera angles, editing, and then the music, of course. Like, we can all still hear that music. That particular scene creates an atmosphere of dread and suspense, and then, of course, the shocking plot twist at the end. So that's really the kind of film that kind of exemplifies the power of visual storytelling. And one of the reasons we're talking about films, not just books, even though this is a course on writing thrillers, is that if you can write a thriller that feels like a movie, then you're doing a great job, and your readers will not be able to look away from the page. The movie Seven, gritty crime thriller known for its dark atmosphere and unsettling themes. The director, David Fincher, I think, could be wrong about that, but anyway, the use of lighting, color, and pacing creates a real sense of unease to the viewer. The narrative is pretty twisted, involving a serial killer who bases his crimes on the 7 deadly sins, has a shocking climax, which also kind of serves as a commentary, the movie does, on the nature of good and evil, and then also the complexity of morality. So again, thrillers are not just always superficial, fast-paced action fest, right? They can provide a message and really can be effective as long as they're not too overt. Because nobody, again, wants to get, they don't want to be preached at while they're reading their thrillers. But you can explore these various themes, and the best thrillers do. And then finally, Inception. That's a sci-fi thriller that combines elements of action, suspense, and psychological drama. So the above examples of these successful thrillers are pretty diverse in their themes and approaches. So a thriller is not just a thriller. So if you're thinking that, maybe I don't want to write that kind of thriller, there's probably a kind of thriller that you would be interested in. So even though there's very diverse, but there are common elements that contribute to the success of a thriller. One recurring theme is the exploration of the human psyche and the complexities of morality. Often through the use of flawed and nuanced characters. A lot of thriller characters, protagonists, are flawed. The hero of thrillers, they don't always have to be perfect. In fact, it's better if he or she is not perfect. Another common feature that we see is the use of unexpected plot twists. Those keep the reader guessing and involved. And finally, high-stakes conflict that creates a sense of urgency and tension throughout the narrative. So just to wrap this section up, analyzing successful thrillers can provide valuable insights into the elements and techniques that contribute to their success. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to look at things that worked and then emulate those. By understanding those key features and concepts of the most successful thrillers, we as aspiring writers can really hone their craft and sort of reverse engineer that to replicate the success. In a thriller, the ability to captivate readers hinges on relatable characters, tense circumstances, and high stakes. To do this, it's important to delve into the protagonist's personality. We want to design a character possessing a blend of strengths, weaknesses, and contradictions. This creates depth and authenticity. I've noticed a lot of time in thrillers, especially, and I have to confess I have had a tendency to do this as well, is that we want to focus on the strengths of our main character, our hero, whereas they need weaknesses and contradictions as well. They're not a superhero, right? But equipping them with this broad spectrum of emotions allows them to respond effectively to various challenges that should arise throughout the course of the novel. Backstory is another essential aspect of characterization. You want to create a backstory that has a direct connection to the plot, if possible, and this adds nuance to the character's personality and motives. You can use that backstory also to help forge emotional bonds between the protagonist and other characters within the story. And if you can create that bond amongst your characters, you're going to create that bond also with the reader. Now, motivation is the driving force behind your protagonist's actions. So pinpoint your protagonist's aspirations, their ambitions and dreams, so that will propel them forward in the narrative. You want to identify the emotional cravings that fuel your character's actions. Like, why are they doing the things they're doing? It can't be random, right? What is deep inside them that is moving them forward and keeping them going? Could be things like seeking love or acceptance or redemption. And then you want to devise situations and challenges that compel your protagonist to face those very fears and vulnerabilities. Seems kind of mean in a way, but that's just how it goes. It's often said that luck in writing is not a good idea. Like, you can't have the Deus Ex Machina kind of thing where your character has good luck and magically gets out of a situation. That simply doesn't work. So good luck doesn't work, but bad luck often does. So have them face the very thing that they were worried about. And you want to spend time building up to that, so there's a sense of impending doom that creates suspense for the reader as well, and it raises the stakes. Conflict is what engages the protagonist in the struggle. So present them with moral quandaries that test their values and their convictions. Like, how strongly do they actually believe the things that they've said they believe, right? Investigate the emotional repercussions of those actions as well. So there are things they need to do or that they want to do, but what are the consequences? What would happen if they did that? We want to intensify those internal struggles. Also, introduce a series of hurdles that can assess their abilities, their resourcefulness, and determination. Push those characters to the limit. You want to provide them with as much hardship as you can. Put your character through hell and then see what happens when they're there. Also employ techniques like cliffhangers, time constraints, red herrings to amplify the suspense, keep your readers on their toes, because the protagonist's journey of transformation is vital to the story. So depict how they evolve through the novel due to their experiences as relating to those cliffhangers, time constraints, red herrings. How do they respond to the things in the novel? Allow your character to learn from their missteps and grow because of the mistakes they make. This will showcase their resilience and adaptability and help create that character arc you want with your main character. Nurture their relationships with other characters, the supporting cast, who may either support or they may challenge your protagonist, because that will contribute to their development even further. Also, utilize the protagonist's interactions with the antagonist to expose new aspects of the personality. So creating a compelling protagonist for a novel does require a pretty profound understanding of the character. You want to know them as well as you possibly can. You may not, and you probably won't, put most of the stuff that you'll learn about your character in the book, but the more you know about them, the more believable it's going to be when you start to actually put this character on paper. And by designing a multifaceted, emotionally engaging, and a changing protagonist, you can enthrall your readers and really propel that story to new heights. Because really, a successful thriller lies at the heart of a character who not only confronts the adversity that he or she is being faced with, and that may just be the protagonist, whether it's a person or elements or a life struggle, but they also grow and transform as a result of those very struggles. So by weaving these elements into your protagonist's development, you have a much greater chance of sculpting a character that will leave an indelible impression on readers and have them remembering that character long after they finish your book. So let's talk about another thing that I think makes a great story, and that is how important it is to have a complex antagonist, that believable villain. We all love a good hero, right? But the story really is, at least in my opinion, only as strong as its antagonist. So let's talk about creating those believable villains that really make a story come to life. Now, when I say believable, I don't just mean somebody who is super evil, like the mustache-twirling, world domination kind of vibe. I mean somebody who feels real to us and to the reader. They have depth and their motivations actually make some kind of sense. A villain that the audience can understand, even if they don't agree with them and their actions. In fact, I think the best villains are often those that sort of blur the line a little bit between good and evil. We don't approve of what they are doing, but we can kind of understand maybe why they're doing it. So how do we do that? How do we create those complex, nuanced bad guys and gals? Well, first of all, give them a backstory. This may sound kind of obvious, but I'm always surprised, even in my own writing, how easy it is to skip that step. You want to hurry up and develop your protagonist. Well, we forget about the other side. A good backstory for your antagonist helps us understand why a villain is the way they are, what experiences has shaped them. Because really, the villain is the hero of his or her own story as well, just like the protagonist is on the other side. But, this backstory doesn't need to be a sob story. We're not trying to justify their actions, but it does need to make their motivations clear. We need to understand why they are doing the things that they are doing. Now, let's talk about the flaws, not just talking about weaknesses like a fear of spiders or an allergy to peanuts or something like that. I mean, real human flaws that make them relatable to us as humans. Maybe they're arrogant or short-tempered. Maybe they have a soft spot for somebody they shouldn't. Maybe that somebody is the protagonist. That might be interesting. But those little imperfections not only make our villains more interesting, but they also give our heroes something to exploit. And in that way, you can, like the character development kind of plugs in and becomes part of the plot. And that's what we want. We want one to complement the other. But speaking of heroes, it is essential that our villains have a strong connection to those heroes, those protagonists in our story. Why are they fighting? There needs to be a reason for it. It shouldn't be random. A great villain is a foil for the hero, showing us what the hero could have been had they made the wrong choices. And on the other side, perhaps what the villain could have been had they made the correct choices, two sides of the same coin. Because if you think about it, the villain and the hero do share common ground, at least ideally. It's what makes their conflict all the more personal and engaging. And the more personal the story is, the more, again, engaging it's going to be. Those two things go hand in hand. And finally, don't be afraid to let your villain evolve, because people do change. And so could our antagonists. They don't need to become the good guys, and probably won't if you're writing thrillers. But maybe they could learn from mistakes and adapt. Maybe start to question their own actions. One great way to do this is to have them reach a fork in the road where they have to make a decision. Take one way, it's redemption. On the other way, they double down on what they're doing and on their path to destruction. Of course, we know generally which way they're going to choose. They're going to choose the destruction path because that's the way the story is going to unfold. But they do have that point in time where they could have made a better choice, and it makes their end all the more poignant. So let that villain grow and develop over the course of the story. It makes them more intriguing, and I suppose they could find some redemption along the way, depending on what kind of story you're trying to tell. Well, there you have it. To create believable villains, give them a backstory, some human flaws, a strong connection to the hero, and perhaps even some room to evolve. A truly great villain, remember, is one that we can't help but be captivated by, even as we root for their downfall. So let's talk about secondary characters in thriller novels. Now, as a writer, you might find yourself focusing on the protagonist and antagonist, of course, but secondary characters also play an important role. They can bring depth and richness to the narrative, serve as a foil for main characters, and also add tension to the plot. When you're writing a thriller, you need to make sure that these secondary characters are intriguing, compelling, memorable. So let's dive into some ways to develop these characters and make them really stand out. First of all, let's consider their roles. In a thriller, secondary characters can have various functions. They can provide information or help to the protagonist, act as a red herring to lead the reader astray, or even become an unexpected ally or foe. A real as a traitor, right? Think about the purpose each secondary character will serve in your story and make sure that their role contributes to the overall suspense and tension. If not, it's possible they're dead weight and you can maybe cut them. Now let's talk about backstory. Well, you don't want to overload your reader with too much information about secondary characters because some of it just may not be important. It is important to give them a bit of history, especially if these secondary characters are truly going to play a role. This not only makes them feel more real, of course, but it helps to explain their motivations and actions. You don't want randomness in this sense. You don't have to reveal everything at once, of course. Sprinkle it. In fact, it's better if you don't, but sprinkle bits of their backstory throughout and then slowly reveal who they are and why they matter. In terms of their personalities, your secondary characters should have distinct personalities that do set them apart from one another. This makes them more engaging and memorable for the reader. So to achieve this, try to give them unique voices, quirks, habits, pay attention to mannerisms, speech patterns, and even physical appearance. This helps make them feel like real people. We don't need to go overboard and make them into caricatures, but just pay attention to these things and be mindful of them. One thing to remember, too, while developing these secondary characters is we don't want them to be caricatures and we don't want them to be stereotypical. Like it might be tempting to create a character who is simply the funny sidekick or the wise old mentor because there are templates there. It's easy to follow, and those are great character types, but it's a lot of times important to dig a little bit deeper. Now, by giving these characters their own desires, fears, and motivations, they'll be more complex, and in turn, they'll make your story that much better. But conflict is key in a thriller, so let's not forget to include a little conflict between your secondary characters and your protagonist or antagonist. Simple disagreements between how things should go, and maybe if your protagonist is a detective who wants to rescue the kidnapped child, maybe there's some disagreement with the secondary characters about how they're actually going to go about doing that. Conflict is key in thrillers and really in any book to drive that forward, because without conflict, really nothing matters. Another aspect to consider when developing secondary characters is their relationship with the main characters. Sometimes those relationships can be just as important as the main plot. For example, I mentioned the detective, but consider the bond between a detective and their partner, or the tension between an investigator and a suspect. Those connections can serve to humanize as well, and those, of course, makes them more relatable, which is what you always want. And finally, think about the arc of the secondary characters. Of course, they're not going to be on as significant a journey as your protagonist is, but it's good if they can still experience some growth or change themselves. Again, that just adds more and more depth, more and more layers to your book, making them feel more dynamic and well-rounded. So imagine you're watching a movie or reading a book, and the characters start conversing in a way that feels flat and unnatural. That quickly pulls you out of the story, doesn't it? Well, that's why writing engaging dialogue is so essential. It brings those characters to life and helps drive that narrative forward, something that's so important in a thriller book. So let's talk about some tips and tricks to help you write dialogue that resonates with your audience and will breathe life into your story. First of all, become a keen observer of everyday conversations. So pay attention to how the people around you speak, their natural cadences, the nuances of their language. This will help you create dialogue that feels real, natural, engaging. So make mental notes, or real notes if you can get away with it, of those idiosyncrasies, rhythms, tones that make each person's speech unique. And then when you incorporate those elements into your characters' conversations, they'll automatically become more relatable and three-dimensional. Now, we don't necessarily want to write dialogue exactly how people in the real world think, or talk rather. The point is to make the reader feel as if this is how people actually talk. So next, when creating compelling dialogue, it's essential to give each character a unique voice in the story, something that reflects their personality, their background, emotions. Consider their age, education level, regional dialect if they have one, and then life experiences will play into it as well. So use all of these elements to create those speech patterns. By developing distinct voices for your characters, you'll make it a lot easier for your audience to differentiate between those speakers and then become invested in their stories simply because not everybody sounds the same. And remember not to use dialogue as a way to dump information or fill space, because it's really easy to do that, but try to resist the urge, the temptation. Make sure that every conversation serves a purpose. Why are they actually speaking right now? Whether that's advancing the plot, revealing character traits, or creating some delicious tension between some characters. So by keeping dialogue relevant, you'll maintain your audience's interest and keep that story moving forward. Subtext is great. It's like the secret sauce of dialogue, like the unspoken or the underlying meaning between the surface of a conversation. I think we've all been in a conversation where somebody has said something to us, and we could tell that wasn't quite what they meant. That adds some depth to your characters and their interactions, making the dialogue more engaging and intriguing. So to master the art of subtext, think about what your characters want, what they fear, maybe they're hiding something, and then let those emotions drive their words. And here's an area where the better you know your characters, the easier this will be. Also, when writing dialogue, aim to show your characters' emotions and intentions through their actions and words rather than just explicitly stating them. This makes for a better experience, a more immersive experience. So use body language, tone, word choice to convey those emotions and thoughts without just stating them outright. That's another example of show, don't tell, which, we've all heard over and over, but the reason we hear it is because it's true. And while dialogue is crucial, though, striking the right balance between conversation, action, and description is also important. Too much dialogue can make a story feel stagnant, while too little can leave your audience disconnected from the characters, and their attention can begin to wander. So break up the dialogue with actions, thoughts, descriptive passages to maintain that sense of pacing and keep your audience engaged. And this was one of my favorite ones. One of the best ways to ensure that your dialogue flows naturally and feels authentic is to read it out loud. This can help you identify awkward phrasing or overly formal language or those inconsistencies in your characters' voices. Because if a dialogue sounds stilted or forced when speaking, well, consider revising it until it flows smoothly. So there you have it. Writing compelling dialogue is an art. It takes time and practice to perfect. But by following these tips and tricks, you can create conversations that captivate your audience and breathe life into your story. So recap. Remember to listen to real-life conversations. Give your characters distinct voices. Use subtext and body language to show rather than tell. So with persistence and dedication, you'll soon master the art of crafting engaging dialogue that will have your audience hanging on every word. So we can have a firm grasp on character development, conflict, pacing, all the things we've been talking about, but none of those elements will truly shine without a captivating premise at the heart of the thriller novel. A strong, intriguing premise is the foundation of the story, drawing the readers in and setting the stage for the action-packed journey that lies ahead. So first, let's define what we mean by a premise. So a premise is the central idea or concept that drives the story. It's the what-if question that your novel seeks to explore, the unique hook that sets your thriller apart. A captivating premise should not only be interesting and original, as much as is possible, but also ripe with potential for conflict, tension, and suspense. So, how do you go about crafting a captivating premise? Well, start by brainstorming a list of ideas that intrigue you. These could be inspired by real-life events, news stories, personal experiences, or just the depths of your own imagination. Don't be afraid to think outside the box, too, and consider unconventional ideas, or take multiple ideas and smash them together and make something new that way. But once you've got a list of potential premises, it's time to refine and develop them. So consider these things. Is it original? Your premise should offer something new and exciting. It's fine to draw inspiration from existing works. Of course, we all do, but just try to make sure that your premise has something unique to set it apart. Secondly, does it have the potential for conflict and tension? It absolutely has to. It should naturally lend itself to high stakes situations and create opportunities for the characters to face obstacles and challenges. And then, of course, can it sustain a full length novel? The premise needs to be rich and complex enough to drive a compelling narrative forward from beginning to end of something that's over 50,000 words. So make sure there's enough substance to keep your idea, or enough substance in the idea to keep your readers engaged. 4, is it emotionally resonant? A captivating premise should have some emotional depth, allowing your readers to connect with your characters and their struggles on a deeper level rather than just fast-paced action, which we also want, of course. But if you dig down a little deeper, it just makes it all the better. And then finally, can it generate intrigue and suspense? So a great thriller premise should pique the reader's curiosity and encourage them to ask the questions and then become invested in those answers. Well, assuming that all of these answers are yes, and you've settled on a premise that checks all these boxes, it's time to start building your narrative around this central idea. Use your premise as a launching point for your characters, your conflicts, your plot, and ensure that every aspect of your story serves to explore and develop that core concept. And as you're writing the novel, keep that premise front and center in your mind, and keep asking yourself how each scene, each character, each plot point relates to it. It's really easy, and I know this, it's really easy to veer off the beaten path and start exploring other subplots that aren't totally connected, but keep your eye on the ball. Make sure everything relates to the thing you started out doing. So in conclusion, a captivating premise is the foundation upon which your entire thriller novel rests. And by taking the time beforehand to brainstorm, refine, and develop that central idea, you'll have already set the stage for a successful story. So we've mentioned this before in other lectures, but let's talk about high-stakes conflict, because a thriller it's just not a thriller without it. The high-stakes conflict is what keeps your readers reading. So let's dive in and talk about that. First things first, what do we mean by high-stakes conflict? What is it? Well, essentially, it's a situation or a series of events that pose a significant threat to your protagonist or other characters. The stakes are high because the consequences of failure are dire, generally involving life or death, but it could be the loss of something valuable or the potential for other types of catastrophic consequences. The high stakes is what drives your characters to take the risks and make those difficult decisions, face their fears, and quite frankly, it's the reason why they embarked on this whole hero's journey thing in the first place. So now that we know what high-stakes conflict is, let's talk about how we create that in a thriller novel. One way is by putting those characters in situations where they have a lot to lose. Life of a loved one, their career, their reputation, their own life. That sense of impending doom or danger automatically will create that high-stakes situation. Another key component is time pressure. When your characters are racing against the clock, the tension goes up exponentially. That sense of urgency can be created in so many different ways. Could be a ticking time bomb, or a deadline for a ransom payment, a rapidly spreading virus that has to be contained. And don't be afraid to raise the stakes as the story goes on. In fact, that's what we need to do. In a thriller novel, it's important to keep that tension high throughout and continually increase the danger and the consequences. One way to do that is by introducing unexpected twists and turns. So just when your characters think they've overcome one obstacle, throw them another curveball, a betrayal, a new piece of information, or maybe they realize they've been on the wrong track this entire time and have to go back to the beginning, that whole square one situation. Another important aspect, though, of the high-stakes conflict is the emotional investment of your characters. And we've talked about this quite a bit throughout this course. But when your characters are personally invested in the outcome, the stakes are just immediately higher because they care. Their emotional connection can be established through personal connection to the antagonist, backstory that ties the character to the central conflict, and means that they just can't walk away, or a strong desire to protect or save someone or something that they care about. But remember that high-stakes conflict does not always have to be only purely external. Internal conflicts, like the character's inner demons, their doubts, fears, those can also create tension and raise the stakes. When a character is forced to confront those internal struggles, while also facing external threats, it becomes even more compelling because they are then weakened, and the reader may see that the hero then has a choice about what he or she is going to do. So in conclusion, creating and sustaining high-stakes conflict is essential for a successful thriller. I mean, it just simply has to be there. So put your characters in dangerous situations, add time pressure, raise the stakes, and establish those emotional connections, and you can create that heart-pounding, page-turning narrative that we all want to write. So you've got high-stakes conflict, and your characters are facing some serious pressure. Now it's time to turn up the heat even more by introducing obstacles and challenges to just make it a little bit worse for them. Building suspense is crucial for any thriller, and the best way to achieve that is by putting your characters through the ringer with a series of tests and trials. First, let's talk about the obstacles and challenges and what those can look like in a thriller. They can come in many forms, from physical barriers and dangerous situations to emotional turmoil and moral dilemmas. Whatever shape they take, the key is to create tension by making it difficult for your characters to achieve those goals or solve the central mystery or problem of the story. One way to introduce obstacles and challenges is through external forces. Those can be other characters, such as an antagonist who is actively working against a protagonist, or they can be environmental factors like a storm that hampers your character's progress. External obstacles create a sense of danger and urgency, pushing your characters to their limit as they struggle to overcome these hurdles. But don't forget about the power of internal obstacles as well. As we mentioned earlier, internal conflicts can be just as compelling as external ones. By exploring your character's fears, doubts, personal demons, you can create an added layer of tension and suspense. Internal obstacles force your characters to confront their weaknesses and make difficult choices, often with those high-stakes consequences that are so important in a thriller novel. When introducing obstacles and challenges, it's important to keep the pacing of the story in mind. That thriller novel should have sense of momentum we've talked about before that's constantly pushing forward as your characters work to overcome these obstacles. By alternating between moments of high tension and quieter, character-driven scenes, you'll create a sense of ebb and flow that keeps your readers engaged and invested in the story, because readers need a break as well, so give them a chance to breathe. But remember, not every obstacle or challenge your characters face should be insurmountable, right? So to maintain the suspense, it's important to strike a balance between success and failure by allowing your characters to experience small victories along the way, and emphasis on the small, just little nuggets of good news. You'll create a sense of progress and give your readers some hope. Another crucial aspect of building suspense with obstacles and challenges is the element of surprise. Of course, we're talking thrillers, so by throwing those unexpected twists and turns at your characters, and thereby at your readers as well, you'll keep them guessing. This can be achieved by introducing new information that maybe changes the course of the investigation, revealing hidden alliances, betrayals, I always love that one, or presenting your characters with a seemingly impossible choice. And finally, consider the long-term consequences of the obstacle and challenges your characters face. The choices they make and the obstacles they overcome should have lasting effects on the characters and the story as a whole. Like, their choices have to matter a great deal. This creates a sense of continuity, and it also adds depth to your narrative and raises those stakes. And the higher the stakes, the better the characters, the more the readers will be invested in the outcome of the story. So, in summary, building suspense with obstacles and challenges, crucial element. By introducing a mix of external and internal hurdles, you can maintain that sense of momentum and pacing. and incorporate elements of surprise, long-term consequences, and thereby creating a gripping, suspenseful narrative that keeps the reader hooked. So let's talk about an oft overlooked part of stories, those subplots, those small story elements that can add depth, complexity, and excitement to the main story. But how do you create subplots that enhance the main story without causing confusion or detracting from it? Well, first, I think it's important to remember that subplots are like tasty side dishes at a dinner party. They should complement the main course without taking over or distracting from it, like the roast beef was terrible, but those bacon-wrapped shrimp, you know, I'm hungry now. Anyway, so will they reveal new sides of a character or add to the story that you've already created? Those best subplots do enhance the main story. They can also clarify themes or add an unexpected twist that's delicious. Maybe not as delicious as those shrimp, but I need to stay on track with these things. I'm sorry. So it's important to find a balance between complexity and clarity. So while it's tempting to create an intricate subplot and a lot of fun to write those, we don't want the audience to get lost in a maze of storylines. So we need to keep things simple, but not too basic. So simple, but not too simple. That's probably not super helpful, but how do I rephrase this? So we just need to find that perfect point where the subplots engage without causing confusion. So that might mean limiting the number of subplots to one or two, and for sure just make sure they're easy to understand and follow and just don't take center stage. And don't be shy about using subplots to explore your characters. So often those stories that stick with us have well-developed characters who have changed throughout the story, right? That's sort of the ideal, the character arc. The subplots provide the perfect opportunity to dig into the characters' backgrounds, their motivations, desires, goals, and that will help you create a more engaging experience for the reader and add that emotional depth. And then related to that is the ability of a subplot to provide a change of pace. So a well-crafted subplot can give the readers a break from the main story's intensity. And we're talking about thrillers here, and those tend to be fast-paced and intense, and that's all good, but people do need a break. The main story is just charging forward, and the subplot's a great way to give the audience a chance to catch their breath. And at the same time, it doesn't bring the main story to a screeching halt because we've just shifted focus for a bit, right? So we don't want to stray too far away. And we also want to remember to keep the subplot relevant and connected. But again, it's a good way to break up the pace. And then speaking of timing and pacing, it is important to weave those subplots into the main story at just the right moments. Introduce them too early or too late and can really slow down the story, causing that confusion and disorientation and that we definitely do not want. So it's just important to be strategic about the pacing of our subplot and strategic about the placement of our subplot as well, so it can be most effective and then unfold at a natural rhythm. So we've talked a lot about the importance of conflict, high stakes, and the suspense in thriller novels. But in order to create a truly satisfying and engaging story, it's crucial to find the right balance between conflict and resolution. So let's talk about how to strike that perfect balance and ensure that your thriller novel delivers maximum impact and leaves your readers breathless. So first, let's consider the rhythm of your story. A well-paced thriller should feel like a roller coaster ride, with peaks of intense conflict and tension, followed by moments of resolution and reflection. This ebb and flow creates a sense of momentum, keeping your readers engaged and eager to find out what happens next. So to achieve this rhythm, start by mapping out the major conflicts and resolutions in your story. Identify the moments of high tension, as well as the quieter, character-driven scenes that allow your readers to catch your breath and also allows them to learn more about the people populating your world. By alternating between these two types of scenes, you'll create a natural rhythm that mirrors the emotional journey of your characters. Now let's talk about timing. When it comes to balancing conflict and resolution, timing is everything. You want to make sure that your moments of resolution are well-timed, allowing your readers to experience a sense of relief and satisfaction before plunging them back into the thick of the action. So to get this timing right, consider that emotional arc of your story. At what points do your characters need a reprieve? When should they experience moments of triumph or growth? By paying close attention to the emotional beats of your narrative, you'll be able to identify the best moments for resolution, thereby ensuring that your readers remain invested in the story as well. Now keep in mind that resolutions don't always have to be complete or permanent. In fact, partial or temporary resolutions are a powerful tool for maintaining that suspense and keeping readers on their toes. But by allowing your characters to achieve these small victories or make some progress toward the goal, then only to be faced with new challenges or setbacks, like, one step forward, 2 or 3 steps back, you'll create a sense of unpredictability. Another key aspect of balancing conflict and resolution is ensuring that your resolutions are earned. Your characters should have to work hard to overcome the obstacles and challenges, and those successes should feel then well-deserved. By making your characters struggle and fight for their victories, you'll create a sense of investment and engagement. Finally, let's address the ultimate resolution, that climax and conclusion of your story. In a thriller novel, the climax must be high stakes, a high-tension showdown between your protagonist and antagonist, with the resolution providing a satisfying and fitting conclusion to the story. This resolution should also feel like the natural culmination of your character's journey, tying up loose ends, resolving the central conflict of your narrative. So, to conclude, finding the right balance between conflict and resolution is difficult, but also essential for a truly satisfying thriller novel. So pay close attention to the rhythm and pacing of your story, time those resolutions carefully and purposefully, and ensure that your character's successes feel earned and well-deserved. So you've got your captivating premise, your well-developed characters, and a perfect balance between conflict and resolution. Now it's time to take your thriller to the next level by incorporating plot twists, cliffhangers, and reveals that will keep your readers guessing and eagerly turning those dog-eared pages. Wait, you don't use a bookmark? Anyway, in this chapter, we'll explore the art of crafting these game-changing moments and how to use them effectively in your thriller novel. Well, let's start with plot twists. A plot twist is an unexpected turn of events that challenges your reader's assumptions and changes the direction of your story. When executed well, a plot twist can shock and surprise the reader, adding a new layer of intrigue and suspense to the narrative. To craft a successful plot twist, let's consider the following tips. First, lay the groundwork. A great plot twist should feel surprising yet almost inevitable, at least after the fact. This means that while your readers may not see it coming, they should be able to look back and recognize the clues and foreshadowing you've provided. Be subtle with your hints, but make sure they're there. Second of all, stay true to your characters. Make sure your plot twist aligns with your characters' motivations, goals, and personalities. A twist that feels forced or out of character is only going to confuse and frustrate the reader. It's not going to have the intended effect. In fact, it'll do completely the opposite, and they might close the book altogether. And third, keep the stakes high. A powerful plot twist should raise the stakes for your characters, forcing them to adapt and make difficult choices in the face of the new challenges. Now, let's discuss cliffhangers. A cliffhanger is a suspenseful moment that leaves your readers on the edge of their seats, eager to know what happens next. Cliffhangers are especially effective at the end of chapters or sections, and they encourage your readers to keep reading in order to find out how the situation will be resolved. So to create compelling cliffhangers, let's think about these 3 tips. First of all, put your characters in danger, obviously. A cliffhanger should create a sense of urgency and peril for your characters, whether it's physical danger or emotional turmoil. Second, raise questions. Leave your readers with questions that they're desperate to have answered, whether that's the outcome of a tense situation or the revelation of a new piece of information. And third, resist the urge to overuse. While cliffhangers can be a powerful tool for maintaining suspense, they quickly lose their impact if you use them too much. And maybe don't use them at the end of books. I've done that, and readers were not happy. Finally, let's talk about reveals. A reveal is the moment when a previously hidden piece of information or a secret is brought to light, thereby changing the course of your story and the way your readers perceive your characters and the actions of your characters. 3 tips for creating a satisfying reveal. First of all, build the anticipation. A successful reveal should be the culmination of a gradual buildup of tension and suspense. By dropping hints and building anticipation, you'll create a sense of excitement and curiosity that will make that reveal even more impactful. Second of all, ensure that the reveal has consequences. The new information or secret should have a significant impact on your characters and the trajectory of the story. So make sure the reveal carries weight and propels that narrative forward. And third, avoid info dumping. When you're presenting your reveal, remain mindful of the pacing and try not to overwhelm your readers with too much information at once. Reveal the information gradually, organically, and allow your readers to absorb and process these new developments. So in conclusion, plot twists, cliffhangers, reveals, all 3 powerful tools that can elevate your thriller novel to new heights. By carefully planning and executing these game-changing moments, you'll create a gripping narrative that keeps your readers on the edge of their seats, desperate to know what comes next. So let's talk about crafting dynamic, pulse-pounding action scenes. Important for thrillers, right? So these are the moments that keep readers on the edge of their seats. So it's important that we make these count. First, let's dive into the importance of clarity. So when it comes to action scenes, keeping things crystal clear is essential. We don't want to leave our reader in the dust, scratching their head, wondering what's going on. So offer a vivid, easy-to-follow picture of what's happening, choose straightforward language, and keep those sentences snappy, because sentence length and that kind of presentation does affect how the reader feels in that scene. And speaking of that, let's talk about pacing. This is really where the magic happens in action scenes. It's all about speed and momentum. You want to keep things moving like a freight train barreling down the tracks. So instead of bogging down the prose with lengthy descriptions or internal monologues, it's important to stick to the essentials. And again, remember those short, punchy sentences? Those are your friends in a thriller action scene. That makes it feel faster, like it's moving forward. And of course, tension. An action scene without tension is not that, right? So how do you create that nail-biting sense of suspense? Well, one trick is to amp up the stakes. In an action scene, make sure your readers know what's on the line. Life or death would be good, right? It's got to be crystal clear why the outcome matters. Another way to crank up the tension is to throw in some unexpected twist. Maybe the hero's weapon jams or an ally turns into a traitor. That's always a good one. You can play around with the environment as well. Sudden storm, collapsing bridge, anything to keep the reader guessing. And emotion. Action scenes aren't just about car chases and explosions, although those are always cool. They're also about characters and that emotional journey. So remember, if nobody cares about the characters, nobody's going to care what then happens to those characters. Okay, so if you haven't taken care of your characters, all the action in the world is not going to make any difference. So don't forget to give your readers a glimpse into your protagonist's thoughts and feelings. Are they scared, angry, desperate? Show us those things, and then we'll be right with that character in the middle of every fight. And then finally, variety. We all love a good sword fight or car chase, but sometimes it can be important to mix those things up. We consider incorporating different types of action, hand-to-hand combat. Get them out of the car and have them chase on foot. A tense and suspenseful standoff. Just helps keep things fresh and interesting. So there you have it, some friendly tips for writing top-notch action scenes: clarity, pacing, tension, emotion, and variety. So, world building is often associated more with the science fiction and fantasy genres because it's obviously vitally important in those, but it's also important in thriller, suspense, and mystery as well. Not limited to sci-fi and fantasy. In thriller fiction, you've got this tense atmosphere and high-stakes situations, and those can rely heavily on crafting a believable and engaging world. So, first of all, we want to establish the atmosphere in tone, of course. That's crucial in creating that sense of suspense, fear, and anticipation that readers want in this genre. A well-crafted world can make readers feel that tension and the dread that the characters in the book are experiencing, and then the readers want to experience that along with them. So by establishing a vivid, immersive setting, authors can draw readers into the story by making them more invested in the characters and their struggles. And as I'm sure we've said before, the more the reader cares about the character, the more they're going to care about what happens to those characters. Second, it's important to ground the story in reality. So in thriller fiction, we're not generally, although sometimes we might be, but we're not generally involving magical realms or futuristic societies, although again, we certainly could be. But we have to have that solid foundation in reality. So world building can help authors create believable settings that can make the narrative feel more authentic. This is especially important if you're dealing with real-world locations or historical events, because if you're inaccurate or inconsistent in those, you're going to break the reader's immersion, especially if they've been to those locations or maybe experienced or have extensive knowledge about those events. And third, we want to enhance character development. The world in which the characters live and interact can significantly impact their behavior, their motivations, and those relationships. So by building a detailed and consistent world, authors can provide readers with a better understanding of the characters and their actions, like who they are and why they are acting this way. So this helps create a more complex and believable character, and that is just so essential for a successful thriller. So we've talked about the importance of world building in thriller fiction, of course. A couple more ways to do that, and we've touched on this already, but research the setting. So whether your thriller is set in a bustling city or a secluded island, or my personal favorite, a small town, especially if it's set in the Midwest, is essential to research that location. That includes understanding the geography, history, local customs, and even the weather, because weather, setting and stuff can actually act as a character of itself at times. So the more accurate and detailed the world is, the more believable it's going to be for the reader. And a reader can somehow sense if something's genuine and accurate or not, even if they don't truly know. It's like they can feel it. Use sensory details. That's a good way to do it. So if you create a fully immersive world, make sure to engage the readers in all the senses, right? So describe sight, sound, smell, taste. That really helps it come alive and can also heighten the suspense and tension. Because if your world feels real, it's just going to matter a whole lot more about what's happening and to whom the events are happening. Third, incorporate social and political dynamics. Thriller fiction often deals with power struggles, conspiracies, conflicts. Earlier in another lecture, we talked about political thrillers. So by incorporating the social and political dynamics of the world, you can create a more complex narrative. And I'm not necessarily talking about big picture stuff like, world or nation governments. I'm talking, you could be small town even. Small town politics, conflicts, stuff between families or family members, friends, city councils, all that kind of stuff. So it doesn't have to be big picture, but you have to get into that and explain those dynamics and how they work and how they may be affecting the story. So consider different factions, the alliances and those tensions, and how they're not only operating within the world, but how they're impacting your characters on a personal level. Make it personal. Always make your writing personal in terms of what's happening to the people that you created. And then balance familiarity and unpredictability. So while it's essential to ground your thriller in a believable world, don't be afraid to add some unexpected twists and turns. Readers want that, in fact, especially in this genre. So balancing that can keep the reader on the edge of their seat because they're never quite sure what's going to happen next. I think it's just key, though, to make sure that any surprises and twists are consistent with the established rules and systems of your world. It may seem contradictory, but make it exciting, but we don't want to be able to predict. It has to make sense, but I think you get what I'm saying. So the reader has to feel like, okay, that actually could happen, but at the same time, you don't want them to guess what that is ahead of time. So that's kind of what makes it tricky. You want to be just predictable enough, but you can't just throw any old random thing in there. It has to fit, or the suspicion of disbelief will collapse. And then finally, and this is such a tried and true thing, I almost hate to say it, but show, don't tell. But it's important here too. So as with any genre, the key to successful world building in thriller fiction is to show rather than tell. Allow your characters to explore and interact with the world and reveal important details through their experiences and their actions. Have them do things and have things happen to them, and then have them react to those things in turn. This can help the reader discover the world alongside the characters and create that experience that we want the reader to experience, make them part of it. World building, an essential aspect in thriller fiction too. Who knew, right? But it helps establish that atmosphere, ground the story in reality, and enhance character development. And by researching your setting, using sensory details, incorporating those social and political dynamics, and balancing familiarity and unpredictability, we can create that captivating and immersive world for our thrillers. So let's talk about foreshadowing, which is one of those nifty little writing tools that can really elevate a story from ordinary to spectacular. It's sort of like setting up dominoes and then waiting for the perfect moment to let them fall, and by so doing, you create this mesmerizing chain reaction. It's about planting seeds for future events. So when the time comes, your readers hopefully gasp in awe as everything clicks into place. That's kind of the holy grail. But what exactly is foreshadowing? Well, essentially, it's the art of giving subtle hints or clues about events that will unfold later in your story. Those events can take the form of symbols, dialogue, minor occurrences that may seem insignificant at first, but eventually they reveal their true purpose. So the readers coming along for the ride may not even notice it, but when they get to the point, generally near the end of the story, they say, that's why they did that. So let's talk about why that technique is such a powerhouse for storytellers. Well, first of all, it creates a sense of anticipation. If the readers do notice something peculiar, they're going to be curious to see where it leads. Like a detective, they'll start piecing together the puzzle. And as the story unfolds, they're going to eagerly anticipate that aha moment. Readers are savvy. And so if you hint at an aha moment, there'd better be an aha moment, just as a side note. I was at this event in Denver. It was called Readers Take Denver, and I was part of a panel where we were doing a crime scene, and the audience itself was tasked with figuring out the clues and interviewing suspects, and I was one of the suspects being questioned, and boy, did they give me the third degree, so much that I actually forgot part of my role. But they were tasked with figuring out who did it and all that good stuff, and I was surprised at how good they actually were at following that breadcrumb trail of clues. So if you put something in there, there is a good chance they're going to pick up on it. So fulfill their expectations, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, so by doing the foreshadowing, it's a great way to build up the tension because readers are starting to pick up on something, what's going on. They're not sure exactly what, but they want to find out exactly what is happening, what it means. And so that helps propel the story forward and keeps them turning those pages, which is obviously what we want. So by hinting at potential conflicts, you'll keep the readers on the edge of their seats because they're craving that resolution. Now, for example, if a character discovers a cryptic note, well, they're going to want to know who wrote that and what it means, right? It's that sense of impending drama that keeps them hooked. What's happening, to whom, why, and of course, how is it going to resolve itself? So how do we craft this little trick? Well, the key is subtlety. As is with so many things, you don't want to give away too much or make the foreshadowing too obvious. Instead, weave those hints into the narrative like a sly whisper into your reader's ear. We don't want to shout at them, we want to whisper to them. If they notice, then you're going to create that drama. If they don't, that's okay too, because when they get to the end, they will remember those things in hindsight. And that's just, it's a beautiful thing. But balance is essential here because you want to pique their interest, but you don't want to spoil the surprise. Because again, readers are savvy. Another tip is to use misdirection. So by leading your readers down a path that seems logical, only to unveil a twist they just didn't see coming, well, they love that. Readers love being tricked, and that's the honest way to trick a reader. So this is when the true significance of the foreshadowed event is revealed. Of course, foreshadowing isn't only reserved for plot twists or dramatic reveals. It can be employed for character development too. By sprinkling in hints about a character's past, you can create that rich, multi-layered backstory that sort of unravels over time. A story without foreshadowing, it can still be engaging, but foreshadowing really it provides the frosting for the cake, I guess. It gives it that little extra something. By planting those seeds for future events and then letting those seeds grow, being patient with them, you can create a lush, immersive world that will have your readers captivated from beginning to end.